Welcome to the Void, and thank you for taking an interest in Primordial Secrets. I'm Garth, the gameplay designer of Primordial Secrets, and this is my unbiased review of the interactive cosmic deck building game, Primordial Secrets. This is a game about unfathomable, godlike beings and their scheming, spying, and soul-devouring, existence-melting, reality unwinding. It's a deck building game with a huge emphasis on player interaction. A dose of hidden information and secret placement, and very little downtime thanks to the simultaneous play. This is a game with huge haymakers, massive game-swinging turns, exciting reveals, and ridiculous combos completely dismantled by one well-placed pawn. Primordial Secrets is foremost a deck builder, and fans of the genre should instantly recognize a lot of the core mechanics. Players each start with a very basic deck of these white-framed pawn cards, and over time you'll be adding new, more powerful cards to your discard pile. And yes, every time you exhaust your deck, you'll be shuffling up that discard pile, stacked with all those exciting new recruits, and that becomes your new deck. But when I set out to design Primordial Secrets, my goal was to create the most interactive deck builder I could. So not only are you building your own combos and engines, but every round you're matching wits with your fellow players, hopefully anticipating their strategies and trying to disrupt their big, risky plays. How do you do that? Well, each round begins with all players drawing 6 cards from their personal decks and secretly choosing 3 of those cards to send out to visit another player, and 3 to keep home to host any potential visitors to your realm. Everyone also secretly decides at this point which other player they want to visit this round. Then, in the second half of the round, everything is revealed and the visits play out in turn order. A lot can happen during these otherworldly visits, but it boils down to a stat check between the visitor's total insight and the host's total deceit to see if any secrets are uncovered or pawns sacrificed. Followed by a buying phase of sorts where the visiting player has a chance to add cards from the central court to their deck. And I should mention that there's 2 ways to win. Either deceive your way to 6 sacrifices, or use your insight to steal 6 secrets. You can get a hint at the aforementioned outwitting as early as the first turn of the game. For example, a pretty common starting hand would look like this. This blue number is insight, basically visiting power, so you can see that messengers make better visitors than musicians. But not so fast. This number up here is devotion, and devotion is what you spend to recruit new cards for your deck. And to use a card's devotion, that card needs to visit another player and survive. So musicians can help you get a stronger new recruit than messengers can, but if your visitor's total insight is less than your opponent's host's total deceit, you will have to lose one of your visitors to their sacrifice pile. And remember, all it takes is 6 sacrifices to win the game. So what do? Do you risk sending a musician or 2? Or play it safe? It probably depends on what cards are available to recruit this round. Speaking of which, there are always 8 pawns available to recruit, and their cost is here in the upper left. There are also always 7 royals available. But these game-changing, build-around juggernauts not only cost a lot of tribute, they also require you to have acquired some number of sacrifices before you can even think about convincing them to join your cause. So let's ignore them for now. Back to that first turn. Let's say you had your eye on this fish frog thing. Like you really wanted it for some reason. Maybe it reminds you of someone, I don't know. In order to pay that 5 tribute cost, you'll need to visit with a total of 5 devotion or more, which means sending 2 musicians and a messenger. And let's say the opponent you decided to visit was 2 steps ahead and knew you were going to go for that angler because they know about your thing for frogfish. So they put 2 musicians in their hosting party to get you. Because this number down here in purple is deceit. Hosting power, remember. So you compare your visitor's total insight, only 1, to your opponent's total deceit, which is 2. Bad news for you. Since your insight is lower, you have to choose one of your visitors to lose to that hosting player's sacrifice pile. Not only is your opponent already 1/6 of their way towards victory by sacrifice, but that sacrifice will help them impress those royals I just mentioned. And worst of all, you have less devotion to spend this turn because you're losing one of your visitors. Welp, GG, right? Might as well forfeit now and get your money back. Actually, this, in my entirely unbiased review of the game, is one of my favorite parts. We knew very early on that in making such an interactive deck building game, there was a real danger for one player to get an early lead and just snowball. So we put a lot of effort into our come from behind mechanics. The first one I already mentioned, did you catch it? That's right. When you have to sacrifice one of your visitors, you get to decide which one to lose. And that card is out of your deck forever. If you've played deck builders before, you'll know how powerful thinning your deck can be. Now this lowly musician that started in your deck is gone back to the ether, and you're more likely to draw your newer, stronger recruits. Another big factor in allowing players to come from behind is wine. That's right, get your opponent so sloshed they forget how to play. Just kidding. These intent cards are how players secretly indicate who they plan to visit on their turn. And this wine intent says, nah, I'm staying home, essentially skipping your turn. I think you'll be surprised how powerful skipping your turn can be later in the game at just the right moment when your opponent's deck is insane and you're just working with a few powerful cards that you didn't happen to draw this turn. The last key to coming from behind is the multiple victory conditions. Building a well-balanced deck of insight, deceit, and devotion is key to getting ahead. But if you find yourself falling behind, maybe it's time to switch gears. Focusing on just one strategy and racing on just one axis will let you steal a win right from under the stronger deck. Sometimes. Speaking of multiple paths to victory, we talked about how to make sacrifices, but what about the other half of the game's name? Secrets. In order to steal a secret from another player, you need to visit them with total insight greater than their host's total deceit by 4 or more. So sacrifices are made if the deceit is higher at all, but secrets are only gained when the insight is 4 or more higher. It sounds harder, but the math says it's actually just about equally tricky. What are secrets, you might ask? Well, just like you're making your deck better over time, secrets improve your other deck, the intents. So when you steal a secret, you can choose any one of the 6 cards from that player's guarded secrets pile and move it to your intent discard pile. The life cycle of intent cards is a little different from your deck, but essentially you'll have a new option to choose from for the rest of the game when deciding who to visit and how. Maybe you'll attend a tournament hosted by the player to your left, where royals will be more easily impressed, recruitable for one less sacrifice this turn. Or maybe you'll hold a tribunal, skipping your turn entirely, but forcing the players to your right and left to visit you this turn instead of whatever they were planning on doing. Lastly, if you have the time, let's go a little deeper, shall we? There's one more place where players have an opportunity to make some interesting choices, during the visit itself. So we talked about what round 1 might look like, but how about we fast forward to round 13? Everyone's deck is stacked, and everyone is only a couple secrets or sacrifices away from victory. After some tense silence, or maybe some rude cajoling and bluffing, everyone has secretly and simultaneously made their decisions about their primordial placements and intents. And your visiting party looks like this. There's a half dozen or so terms you'll find on some cards' effects that you can find details on the glossary card included with the game. But 2 of those terms that will come into play in our example here are captivate and silence. Captivate and silence are sort of 2 sides of the same coin. Captivate sets a primordial's insight and deceit to 0, while silence shuts down the other half of the card, its devotion and its effect. So both your visiting bard and this oh no, this jerk recruited that angler you wanted, so rude. Anyway, both your visiting bard and this hosting shade can silence. But lucky for you, visitors effects always trigger before the similarly timed host effects. The shade would be able to silence your spy before it can activate its powerful effect, since the spy's effect triggers after visiting instead of when visiting. But you could decide to first silence the shade with your bard, so its effect will never happen, thus preserving your spy's ability to steal a secret. But if you do that, you'll only have 6 insight versus your opponent's 8 deceit, which means they would force you to sacrifice one of your visitors. If you're afraid of your opponent getting a victory by sacrifice, maybe you'd choose to use your bard differently, captivating haunt instead, which would bring their deceit down to 0. At that point, your opponent would get to silence your spy, so you wouldn't get to steal that secret, but you also won't have to sacrifice a visitor, as your 6 insight would beat your opponent's now 4 deceit. And with that, I rate the game 42 unborn universes, I guess. So thank you for hearing me out. Thank you so much for checking out my game, and good luck. Have fun.